Right, welcome everyone. My name is Kiana. Thank you for coming today. We have a great set of alumni panelists here to share their experience and answer your questions on the topic of publishing. As we go through the presentation, please feel free to type your questions into the chat or use the raise hand feature and someone will call on you. We'll get started by asking each of the alumni to give a brief overview, about 3 to 5 minutes, of their career path and their current role, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. So we'll go in alphabetical order. I'll read the order off and then I can remind folks as we go through. We'll start with Jeffrey, then Cassie, then Christy, then Rebecca, and finally Catherine. So Jeffrey, if you'd like to start.
Sure. I'm Jeff Dean, and right now I'm a senior editor with Hackett Publishing, and I publish books in the humanities for students for the most part, but I'll give you a little bit of my background and how I got to this point. I studied German and philosophy at Oberlin College in Ohio. And then I took a little time off and traveled around a bit and thought about what I wanted to do and wound up getting into the PhD program in philosophy at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And I was in Madison for about 6 years doing the PhD. Had a great time there. University of Wisconsin was a really good experience. I was glad to have had the chance. As I was finishing up my work on my PhD, just when I was writing my dissertation, a friend of mine had been working for a publisher called Blackwell, which is a British academic company who had a really good philosophy list. And I was studying philosophy, and he wondered if I might want to do some work that he was similar to what he was doing, which was basically following up with professors who had ordered exam copies of books to find out how they liked them and if they thought they might want to use them for their course, follow up on any questions they might have, be helpful, and so on. And that was a great part-time job to do while I was finishing my dissertation. So I did that, and I met the person who wound up hiring me as an editor at a philosophy conference. And we got on along well, and he said that they were going to be posting this job. So I applied and wound up getting the job and moving to the Boston area at the time. And I was with Blackwell for about 14 years. Halfway through that time, they were bought by Wiley, John Wiley and Sons, which is an American company. And so I worked half with Blackwell and then the other half with Wiley Blackwell, which is kind of a merger of the two companies. I also worked for a publisher who people in the humanities will know as Routledge. They also have a big journals program under their parent company, Taylor and Francis. I worked for them for a while. I worked at Harvard University Press for a while doing science and technology books. And then just more recently, a couple of years ago, I joined Hackett when I moved with my family to Vermont. I grew up in Vermont, and Hackett was happy to have a remote editor, and that was good for me. And for those of you who don't know, Hackett is a really great publisher in the humanities, especially philosophy, but also classics and history and Asian studies and a lot of other areas in the humanities. And so I was really happy to have the opportunity to join Hackett. And yeah, I've been here for about 2 years, and it's been going well so far.
Thank you. Cassie.
Hi, I am the assistant lifestyle editor at Parents Magazine. I'm based in New York. That's where I live. So I do all sorts of things around like home decor and food, cleaning, organization, pets, family, fun. I write, I do a little bit of editing, I pick products for us to feature, come up with ideas, all that sort of thing. So I graduated with my bachelor's in English literature and communication arts, as well as a gender and women's studies certificate 2 years ago from UW. And while I was there, my major wasn't super like journalism or publishing focused, but I was a part of the Daily Cardinal and also Moda magazine, which is the lifestyle fashion publication with students. And I just realized that I really loved creating that magazine. I liked writing for it. I liked editing. So my senior year, I applied for the Columbia Publishing course, which is this intensive program at Columbia, all focused on book and magazine publishing. And I was accepted, and I participated in that right after graduating. And that was sort of helpful in moving to New York because I grew up in the Chicago area and I didn't know anyone here. And I also made a lot of good industry contacts. And that was how I got my first internship, which was at Rachel Ray's magazine, which when I started was monthly, and it was called Rachel Ray Every Day. And when I was there, just like a month after I started, it became quarterly, and they ended up like laying off like half the staff, which was really scary as my first big job. But luckily I was able to stay on, and because so many people had left, but there was still quite a lot of work to do, I got to try out a lot of different things there. I wrote for the website a lot, and I learned just all the little things that have to go on behind the scenes, which is really important. And we also picked up a new magazine, which was Reveal, the HGTV Property Brothers like new publication. And that was fun because it was a lot about home decor, and that's something that I'm interested in. Then unfortunately I was laid off in the beginning of the pandemic. So it's sort of a whirlwind, but I got to do some freelance work for a while, writing for Rachel Ray still, and then some like book reviews, and I wrote for Screen Rant, which is like a TV movie publication. So I sort of cobbled together work while I had to. And then at the end of 2020, I got my current job, and I've been there for almost a year. It'll be a year in January. And yeah, I'm very happy there.
Thank you. Christy.
Hi, I'm Christy. I am the senior director of audience growth at SiriusXM. I've been there for probably about 4 months. And so my job is, I basically call myself a professional ear finder because I work on their podcast team. And so, yeah, my job is to basically lead the team that does audience development and ear acquisition, basically for Stitcher, Sirius, and Pandora podcasts. I've been focusing on podcasts pretty exclusively for about 6 or 7 years now. It's actually a really interesting part of the kind of publishing ecosystem because it's been nothing but a growth story, which is actually kind of fun for me. I think a lot of other things I've done in my career haven't quite felt like the upward trajectory that podcast does. And I think that that's probably why I've like stuck with it for about 6 or 7 years. I kind of often joke that my career path doesn't make sense to anyone else but me. And I would say that the connective tissue is I go where I think there's enthusiasm, both on my end, but also just in terms of the overall industry. And I kind of refuse to let anybody put me in a box. So I actually got my start out of college. I thought I was going to be an attorney. And actually worked at one of the biggest law firms in the United States, realized I would be a very better attorney, stopped myself, thankfully, before I went to law school. And then actually kind of like Cassie, I actually stumbled upon this program in New York. It's actually the same thing that she went to, but it was at NYU called the Summer Publishing Institute. So I did that, gosh, a while ago. It's been a beat, like in 2005, I think. And so it's half books. I think they do more now, but at least at the time it was half books, half magazines. And that's what got me into book publishing. And so I did book publishing for probably about a decade, mostly focused on more of the consumer side of things, unlike Jeffrey. So I did more like, I worked at HarperCollins for a long time. I worked at Bloomsbury. Liked it. I think what I didn't like, and I don't know that I kind of could put this to words at the time, was that I don't know, I felt like a cog in the machine, and that they had kind of figured out how to do things. And that's not really what I like doing. And so I think now with hindsight, I actually really like more of the startup environment. And I actually really like working in a medium where there is no playbook. Anybody who says that they figured out podcasting is full of poo-poo, is what I would say, just because it kind of keeps changing. That's not a mature medium. And for my personality type, I really enjoy that. So yeah, I think I worked at HarperCollins for a long time, worked in book publishing for a long time, got a little bored. So I decided to kind of work more on the digital side of things. So, and it's weird. Like I wound up I was an animation producer for a year. because somebody gave me a chance and I know how Google works and I was going to I could figure it out. I worked as a YouTube channel manager, which was actually really good, I think, experience for what I do now. But none of it was really hitting in terms of like my own personal passion. Like even YouTube, like it's just not a native thing for me. I dip in and out, but I'm not somebody who watches YouTube every day. And so this light bulb went off about 6 or 7 years ago. I started seeing more job postings where you could kind of see that podcasting, there was a professional layer being added on top of it. And that gave me the opportunity with somebody like me who has like a media background to do something with it. And so I just happened to get in early. And it's led to a lot of really great opportunity, both within, I think, my professional sphere, but also I was able to do something like launching the Podcast Academy, of which I'm a co-founder. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. Rebecca.
Well, hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Olson. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a double major in creative writing and Scandinavian studies. And currently, in my work, I'm the senior director of content for the Portland State University Foundation. So I'm based on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon. And I'm in charge of directing content and building out stories and video content that tells the story of philanthropy on campus. So it's a fairly large nonprofit, and our university is smaller than Madison, but bigger than some of the little tiny state schools. So we have a fairly big reach in terms of the impact of the work that I'm doing. I got into communications and publishing. I think I'm more on the kind of content direction communications specialist side of the publishing spectrum, though I entered the industry through, as I said, creative writing. And then I was working right after college for some little literary journals here and there. I was involved with Medicine Review and with Illumination when I was on campus. And I was playing with some literary magazines that led to me pursuing an MFA in creative writing in Oregon. And after I got my MFA, I was interested in doing more literary publishing, but obviously career opportunities were fairly limited if you want to do that kind of boutique work. So I found myself taking on freelance writing and editing jobs here and there, which eventually led to an internship with Idealist, which is a nonprofit job board website. I don't know if you're familiar with Idealist, it's pretty big, but I was working on their blog content, and I found that I really loved writing content that had a marketing slant, and meeting people and interviewing people. And that eventually led for me kind of getting more into the marketing side and eventually working in higher education. So I've been doing this for about 7 or 8 years now, and I like the work because it's different every day. Like many of the folks on this panel so far, it's nice to have a lot of variety in your career diet, and I think working in publishing and communications is one of the best paths to take if you're always up for new challenges. And the industry is constantly evolving, and you have to adapt, and you can't just keep doing the same thing that you do every day. So that's what I like about my job, and that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. And Catherine.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine. Like Cassie, I guess I'm a relatively new graduate of UW-Madison, but I started a long time ago. Got my bachelor's in physics in 2014. Took a year off, didn't really know what I wanted to do after that, and decided why not go to grad school. So I went to graduate school for science, and I was working on my PhD in medical physics, and I said, well, what do I really want to do with my life? I realized, well, I don't really like doing research quite so much. I like learning about a lot of different kinds of science and sharing that with others. So to get to my current position, I work as a communications specialist in the Department of Biochemistry on the UW-Madison campus. To get to that position, I kind of did a bunch of ad hoc things. I didn't really know what I was doing, self-taught entirely. Just kind of wanted to get a feel for different opportunities out there. So I wrote some articles for professional organizations like the Graduate Women in Science. I wrote for the department newsletter, helped organize that, just got a feel for some different experiences. And ultimately all that kind of freelance work, emphasis on free. I do not recommend doing that if you don't have to. I ended up getting an internship, a paid internship at Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, which is outside of Chicago. And there I worked with this really great team of science writers and science communicators and editors and photographers and videographers, and their passion for communication, not necessarily publishing, but that content creation side of things really kind of solidified my decision to wanting to go into science communication. But I was still in grad school, and I was still working on my PhD, and I had to decide whether I wanted to finish or not. And really, it was just kind of pushing through. And I had decided to finish, and I was just like, okay, well, I'm just going to do it. Then the pandemic hit. That put finishing that degree off for about a year. I defended my PhD in January 2021, and another science writer at the university emailed me and said, hey, there's this job opening in the Department of Biochemistry. Is this something you'd be interested in? And I said, sure, I'll take a look. And it seemed like the perfect fit. It's kind of like a first job that you get. It's really a catch-all position. So I call myself a science writer, but really I'm doing a whole host of different things. I'm basically the external face of the department. So I help plan, do some strategic communications, do content creation, and then follow that all the way through to distribution and publication for a whole host of different things. So science news, if there's a cool piece of research that comes out from someone's lab, I might write about that. If a faculty member wins an award, I might write about that. Or of course, a graduate student or an undergrad, talking to students is always really fun. I help and manage and write and basically do everything for our, except for graphic design for our annual newsletters and our monthly e-newsletters. Those are kind of our major publications right now. I manage 5 social media accounts, so Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And I also help with internal communications and donor relations and stewardship. So like I said, it's really a catch-all post. I've only been there for about 6 months, but it's been a lot of fun. Every day is different. And if there's any scientists in the audience who are curious about what it's like to transition into this type of career, I'm happy to talk. Thanks.
Thank you all so much for your introductions. We've got kind of all across the board in different careers, and that's wonderful. So I'm going to encourage students again, if you have questions that you'd like to ask the alumni, please type them in the chat or use the raise hand feature, and we'll make sure those get asked. But I will start off with the first question. So several folks have touched on freelance work, and so could you expand a little bit more on how freelance work differs from more standardized industry work? And perhaps how do you find that work?
I could speak to that. I know a couple folks might join in, but I was doing full-time freelance work for a few years before I found my full-time job. And it differs because, I think that it's less stable, of course, than having like a monthly or, twice a month paycheck. So it can feel kind of like feast or famine, but when there's work, it has to be done quickly. It has to be. And so I really enjoyed it because I felt like there was a lot of hustle to it, and there wasn't like that kind of writing work and content development work can kind of like be exciting because it's always completely different. It's like, what's your mission this time, right? And you have 48 hours to like write this like I remember getting jobs from like a coupon book that was going to print, and their regular writer was out and they needed it done yesterday. And it was like, okay, great. And like writing web pages for a small company, or writing, I was also writing infographics for like an infographic resume creator that I met through a friend of a friend on Facebook. And he was my boss for like 2 years. That gave me pretty regular work. And so, there is a question about advice pushing through self-doubt. You know, the interesting thing about freelance writing for me, and I don't know if this is absolutely terrible advice, but I'm just going to say, is that the kind of nice thing about freelance is like you write it and then you give it away, and then your time is, hopefully you're building like a long-term relationship with your clients, but it kind of doesn't matter. Like the speed is sometimes more important than, you can like give it your best shot. And I think that kind of just trying your best, and like, hopefully it hits the spot, and you'll know if it does because they'll hire you again. So there's kind of like this risk ability into the first couple jobs that you get as a freelancer, but you'll get the hang of it. And I think that once you start to build up a portfolio and have work from clients that can connect you to other clients, it sort of starts building out this web. And it does take a while, and I completely understand that that risk is hard, but I think it's a pretty rewarding experience to start building out that network, and every job that you have will lead to another job. That's what I have to say. Oh, but can I also add, I just want to say the most important advice that I would have for if you're trying out dabbling in freelancing is to save money for taxes, because your employers will, when you have a paycheck, they take out that for you. And as an independent contractor, you have to pay your own taxes, and it can bite up like up to a quarter or even a third of your overall earnings. So you got to save and plan for that.
I will second that, because I messed that up when I was younger, and that sucked because I owed Uncle Sam for like 3 years, I think. And it was not fun as somebody who was broke in New York. So save. So, yeah. I would also just kind of add to, because I was just having a spirited discussion about freelance with a former colleague of mine like last week. I gotta say, freelance is not for me. I could do it. There's actually a big need in my particular industry of someone who understands podcast marketing, because a bunch of players who were kind of doing freelance just got wiped off the board 6 months ago. I think for me, even though I can do it, even though I know that there's work there, and so that hustle factor is a little dampened, I do not like it when people don't listen to me. And that's the thing that drives me nuts about freelance. It's like, to Rebecca's point, it's like you do something, you hand it off, and then it's kind of they can do whatever they want with it, right? You fulfilled your end of the bargain. That drives me nuts. I actually really like, I want us to get the table, because when I say something, I'm really passionate about it, and it really bums me out when people don't listen to me. So it's something I've dipped my toe in, clearly because I owed Uncle Sam there for a hot second, but like I almost never stick with it because it drives me nuts. And so I'd rather be in a house somewhere where I can really kind of see something through, soup to nuts. So.
And I guess I have a couple of things to add to that. I started freelancing primarily as a way to kind of get my foot in the door and get some experience. And in terms of like finding clients, what I really did was just pitch my ideas wherever I saw a need, and hope they stuck, and hope people liked my ideas. And it did kind of build from there. I actually still do a bit of freelance work today. I freelance for a trade magazine and for a national lab, but that's more on a commission basis. So I'm assigned articles to write every month, or on whatever basis I've agreed on. And that's really nice. It keeps me involved in a field that I'm no longer researching in, and keeps me connected to some people there in a way that I wouldn't have before. But I'm kind of like Christy in that I could never do that full time. I like some sense of control over the whole process, and I'm just not a fan of the pace either. If I were to, maintain that as my business full time, I don't know that I would have the energy levels to sustain that.
Wonderful. Thank you all for your input. Oh, go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh, well, I also just wanted to say that now that I'm an in-house editor for, now I feel like I'm kind of on the other side of the process because I hire freelancers. And I will say to the audience that if any of you are looking for freelance work, please get in touch with me. I can put my contact information in the chat, but I hire writers all the time for anything from short profiles of people or donors or copy for brochures and things like that. And it's cool, even if you're not living in Portland. So get in touch.
Thank you. Yes, if you'd be willing to put your contact information in the chat, that would be great. So the next question that I have is, what should students be doing to prepare themselves to be successful in the publishing field?
I mean, I could speak to that. I mean, one thing I've found, especially early on, and I think I've known a lot of people who've had this experience, at least in the world of book publishing, which is where I am. That's one of the things I didn't really emphasize. I'm an acquisitions editor, so that means I work with authors and I work with them on coming to agreements about what kind of book they'd like to publish. I go through the contracting process. I help them develop their material. And then over time, we work together to create a manuscript that's suited for its market. So that's what I spend my time doing. But one of the things I found early on in publishing is that it really helps to be willing to just sort of get in to the publishing stream. Even say you want to be somebody who's an editorial like I am, but you notice that there's a marketing assistant job open at a publisher somewhere. I would highly recommend applying for that job or a job in production or in sales or wherever, because there's a lot of lateral movement in publishing and there's so much overlap between the various functions that having a willingness to kind of step into the world of publishing early on, even as an intern, and there are many paid internships in publishing available as well, you really get a sense of what the different aspects of the business entail. You make connections and contacts, and oftentimes you'll have direct work with the department that you might have in the back of your mind as to where you eventually really want to wind up. So I think being open-minded and flexible in that way would be a great way to start off. I don't know if that addresses the question about being prepared. The only other thing I'd add about that is that when you see an area you think you might be interested in, pay attention to who's doing the publishing. So if you read a certain magazine, or you read a certain kind of book, or you listen to a certain kind of podcast, see who it is that's responsible for that, find out more about that company and that group of people. Because oftentimes as readers or consumers of content, we might see the byline and know who the author is. We might not know as much, unless it comes from a major newspaper like the Washington Post or something. We don't always pay attention to who's putting this out. And I think looking into that early on and learning the patterns of what they do, learning what you're attracted to, who it is, and what kinds of things they do is important, because publishing is not a monolith. The entire world of publishing, there are a lot of smaller, some big niches, but everything's kind of chopped up into different kinds of approaches. I'm in academic publishing, others are in trade publishing, some are in other kinds of communications or content production. So really pay attention to who's producing what you're interested in.
I agree with that. And I'll just add, I think it's really important to be familiar and be knowledgeable about whatever it is that you're going into, whether it's magazines or book publishing, etc. With magazines, for example, just be familiar with magazines that are out there and know their styles, know the tone of voice they have, as well as knowing the staff. It's just important, if you're in an interview, to be able to talk about it as if you've been reading it forever, even if you haven't, so just kind of stay on top of what's out there.
I'd also say too that hopefully this isn't going to bum people out on the call, but if you're applying for a job and you're applying on a random website, the chances, especially if you're on the younger side where you might not have experience that will kind of help you stand out with the algorithms, the chances of you actually getting a call back are that. I mean, I'm hiring for 4 people right now, and I will not even tell you how much time I spend in each resume to try to actually figure out like how I'm actually gonna, rebuild my team. And so I think the one thing that I wish somebody would have told me when I was younger is that you have to make connections at the places that you really feel passionate about where you want to land. I can go almost through almost every single job I've had in the past like 10 years, and usually I've had some sort of connection. And so I think when you're just getting started, I would actually kind of counsel people to make like a hit list. I don't know, let's just pretend you want to work at Condé Nast, right? And actually figure out like where in Condé Nast do you actually kind of want to fit in, and start developing those relationships and just reach out cold. Like I had a call yesterday with somebody who was a former UW person who was looking to kind of break in. People say yes if you reach out, blindly. I think developing those contacts on the earlier side actually help them when you see a job posted, you can actually then go to those contacts. Not cold, because I can tell you also what people don't like is to just be like, hey, I happen to see you're a UW alumni. Do you mind helping me get a leg in? No, I don't know who you are. Like, I think it's very presumptive for you to kind of ask that. But if it's something where like you just did an informational call and there's been a little bit of back and forth, in 6 months, if you ask me that, I'm probably much more willing to kind of put my name, and it is my name and my recommendation out there in terms of like, this person getting a job. So yeah, developing a hit list and actually trying to, cultivate that network is hugely important in terms of breaking into, I don't know, I would argue probably almost every part of publishing, but networking.
Thank you. Yes, and being a part of this call today is a great first step in that networking process. So the next question I have for you all is, what are the most rewarding or satisfying parts of your work? And what are the most challenging parts?
It was funny because I was waiting to see if somebody else wanted to jump in since I last spoke, but I'm always happy to end awkward pauses. But I think the part that I actually really love the most, and I would have not anticipated this, is actually managing my team. I happen to be like a very hands-on manager, and gosh, I just love trying to unlock everybody's talents and to try to figure out like how I can make all of the pieces in terms of the team that I work together to actually kind of congeal to like basically make it a better team than anywhere else in the company. And that's not something I would have thought, especially like when I was younger and you're more of like a solo operator. I think the emails, is that like too cliched? Because like I get probably, I'd say about 50 emails an hour, and that just sucks. Like there's no world where like I just don't like emails. Like I'm responding to them and like having to like, I don't know. I just don't like emails. So.
Yeah, I guess I can add to that. Hating emails, yes, for sure. I guess the favorite part of my job, and I don't know if it's going to stay the favorite, I've only been in this job for about half a year, but I really enjoy talking to scientists and sharing their personal stories and their research stories with others. It's kind of cliche, but it's the best part of my job. I just get the most fulfillment out of that.
I think for me, it's still really novel to hold the finished magazine in my hands and see my name in it, or see something that I worked really hard on in it. Like I'm still sort of obsessed with that. It's something that I didn't really get to experience before. Especially it's like the most challenging thing can turn into the most rewarding thing, I think, because it's really challenging to get a lot of last minute requests about things that we need to include in the magazine if it's like an advertiser request. So that can be really frustrating and really difficult, because maybe you worked hard on a story and then you find out that it needs to be cut in favor of something else that someone paid for. And so that's really, it can be sad, it can be frustrating and challenging. But to actually hold the finished product in your hands, then knowing how hard you worked on it, knowing how challenging it was, I think that's incredibly rewarding.
No, I think
Go ahead, Rebecca.
I had spoken earlier about the variety in my work as a content director. And I think that one area that I really love is working in events and like doing script writing and video production for experiences. And there's something really magical about like experiencing or hearing a story or watching a video with other people. I know that during COVID, it's like completely changed and we've had to like find other ways to do that. But there's like something very goosebumpy about like creating an emotional experience that connects people together, and you can feel that. So I love that. And I think that one thing that I wish that I had learned earlier in my career is that in terms of like something that I don't necessarily love, but I also do love, is that everything that I write and edit is so collaborative that sometimes it doesn't necessarily feel like it's like mine, you know, like there's no, like I don't always get a byline on a proposal or on a piece that goes out. But there's something also really beautiful in terms of like creating a piece of writing or a piece that gets passed around to so many people. And sometimes it like kind of waters it down, but sometimes it just makes it so much stronger because it's not your baby. It's not your poem or your like book of short stories. Like, you know, I came from a creative writing background. So that was sort of the, where I was starting, was thinking like, I am the writer. And I've learned to not see myself as the writer, but to see myself kind of as this like, I guess, potato passer between other people. And then it can be so much stronger to have more voices incorporated. So.
I just wanted to echo something Rebecca just said about, you know, I don't mind being in the spotlight, but I'm not somebody who craves it. And I really actually like operating in the background. And so one of my favorite parts of my job is working with an author kind of behind the scenes and helping them develop their voice, develop their ideas. And sometimes I get really lovely acknowledgments in a book. Other times I don't. But one of the funny things I've found is that the relationship between how effusive or whether I get an acknowledgement at all and how much work I've put in is almost non-existent. I will get people, you know, calling me a demigod when I barely felt like I helped them at all, and other people who will ignore my any mention of me, even though I wrote half the book for them. But it doesn't actually bother me that much, because what I really like is the work itself. The thing I probably, and there's some other fun parts of being a book acquisitions editor. For example, I go to conferences, or I sometimes go on campus to meet with potential authors. And part of my job is, to go take somebody to lunch or dinner and have a conversation about ideas and have somebody else pay the tab. That's a nice thing. I mean, that's a very pleasant thing. And so I just remember some of my best experiences have been travel, talking with people, eating a nice meal, getting to discuss really cool ideas. Sometimes it led to a book and sometimes it didn't, but that process itself is a lot of fun. The worst part is probably email. You get a lot of email as an editor. And so I do hate it. On the other hand, it's a big part of my job, and some of what's really interesting and good comes across and happens and transpires in email as well. So I'm not a total hater, but it is both a good and bad part of my job.
Thank you. The next question that I have, because you're all working in very different fields of publishing, is what do some of the employment trends look like in your field, or maybe specifically your company, for entry-level positions for students?
I guess I can start. I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, so academic setting, but there are internships and positions available for current students, actually, who are interested in getting involved with science writing and science editing. And those are kind of a hit or miss. It depends on the need of a department or a lab. But in the future, I may be looking for a science writing intern. So if you like biochemistry, let me know.
I feel like the last few places that I've worked at, certainly in the last 18 months or so, I think recruiters are doing different work to try to bring in younger folks into the industry, because I think a lot of what was happening honestly, before George Floyd, is that there was a lot of people digging into their networks or digging into like their alumni groups or whatever it is. And that's problematic, I think, when you think about underrepresented voices in industries. And so I think one of those trends, like I said, is trying to reach outside of your networks, trying to go to places that we have historically not looked for talent. And then the other one that honestly keeps coming up, even as I'm, hiring right now, is remote work. So, it's a very explicit conversation in a way that it never has been as in terms of my career before, right? It's like, what is your policy? That sort of stuff.
And I guess if I can add one more thing, just to slip in there, because of the pandemic, I think I'm not an authority on this, but I do think the need for science writers or people who can communicate about science, has increased, and there is a more demand for that. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure how that's going to last or what that's going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now down the line.
In the magazine world, a lot of people definitely start out with internships, and it is a really good way to get your foot in the door. It can be unfortunate because not many people can take unpaid internships. There's sort of a select grouping of people who can, but I do think that it's still kind of the way that things are done, that a lot of people start out with internships. A lot of them are paid now, which is really helpful. And I think that if it is paid, no internship is too small because you can get your name out there. You can start building that network, even if it is with just like some tiny little publication. You'll be able to have your hands in a lot of different pots, be able to try out a lot of different things. And then, like someone mentioned earlier, every job leads to a new job. So even if it is just an internship, it will probably lead to you making some sort of connection that could lead to a job, whether it's now or down the road.
The company I work for now is tiny, so we don't actually do internships, and there's not a huge amount of movement. So it's sort of one of those places where you never know where there's going to be an opening. But in the past, I've worked for much bigger companies of 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 people. And in those kinds of contexts, there are a lot of opportunities at the entry level, whether it's an internship or an entry level job. And you just kind of have to look. There are a variety of places. You can go to Publishers Lunch, which is a sort of website where they have job postings. There are a variety of publisher sites. There are big meta job sites like Indeed. I think, as Christy said before, it's not usually helpful to just sort of fling your resume out there and hope for the best. You should try to make contacts at places, and so you should look to see publishers where you're interested, do informational interviews. But I think one of the trends that's been really good in the last decade or so that I've noticed is that internships are much more often paid now than they used to be. I think part of that is changes in labor law, but some of it I think is also just people realizing, people are doing work, and so they should be compensated. It's just a kind of cultural shift as well as a legal one. So I think that's good news. It does mean that some places that used to have internships no longer have them because they run on a kind of shoestring, and so they can't afford that. But overall, I think it's a good trend. And I would just look into companies you might be interested in, especially big ones where there's more room, where there's more movement, and so on.
Thank you all. There is a question in the chat from Caroline. They're curious to know whether you all think additional training is unofficially necessary for entry into publishing.
I don't think it's necessary, but I will say that I have an MFA in poetry that is, I guess, how do I want to put this? It has helped me make more money at my job, because when you have a master's degree, you qualify depending on like where you work and what the levels are. A master's degree is a master's degree, and it counts as that kind of like checks that box to help get you up into a higher pay grade if you work at a bureaucratic institution like mine. And so I don't think that it was necessary to bust into the industry, but I do always encourage more education. And I feel like it can open doors for you later down the road that you might not expect. But I think that the most important thing about pursuing graduate education is to get that funding taken care of, because there are ways that you can apply for fellowships and scholarships and grants or tuition reimbursement agreements and things like that to make your graduate experience, if you decide to go that route, more affordable for you, because it's just not worth it to get into $100,000 in debt for a publishing degree or a master's degree in creative writing or anything like that. So I was able to get a fellowship that paid for my graduate degree, and I wouldn't have done it without that. So I would definitely encourage you to like think creatively and not take on that investment of money unless you're for sure that it's not going to sink you in debt, because that's really real and really scary.
I don't think it's necessary. I don't have like a degree. I just have certificates. And I think that's more about my love of always learning about like the latest and newest thing. I would say that my SPI experience, the Summer Publishing Institute, is slightly different than that. And I'd be kind of curious how Cassie feels, especially because there was, a good 10 years, I think, between when we went, but like, I don't know that I learned a lot from it. I really didn't. Like, I kind of learned a little bit enough to be like, oh, I don't know that I want to be an editor in trade publishing as much as I thought, or things like that. But it's not something that stuck. The knowledge that I learned there has not stuck with me. But I was a shy kid from the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin and knew nobody in New York, right? And so what it did do is give me like contacts that I would not have had otherwise. It gave me something to put on my resume that said, I want to be in publishing, right? Like, so that was really powerful, I think, in opening up doors. And I gotta say too, now that I'm in my 40s, I feel like the people that I met in that program, we're all at a certain level in our career now, and I'm still in contact with them. And so it does. And I feel like I can still interact with people in like kind of new ways in terms of like deals. And so that's been very helpful. So I really don't think it was like a knowledge thing so much as I almost feel like I paid to offset the shyness and the fact that I would never have done the networking that I wish I would have done back then. Basically it offset that. So.
I agree completely. That was pretty similar to my experience. Like I mentioned before, I was afraid to move to New York, and I knew like one person here. So it was really beneficial to meet a whole bunch of people who are around my age in similar boats. And just like one of my best friends now is someone I met at the course. And so that's really just rewarding, valuable. But yeah, it was kind of intense. It was 6 weeks and like very stressful, very competitive. Most of the people in my program were looking for book publishing jobs, which was sort of helpful for me because there were only like 10 of us who were interested in magazines. So I felt less competitive, but like it was definitely stressful. I definitely lost sleep over like, am I gonna get a job basically out of this, because that was essentially what the experience was for. But I do think that, I mean, like I got my first internship because of a industry professional who I met at the course. And I don't know if I would have gotten that without having made those contacts, because same deal, I'm shy. I'm not the best at networking, or at least I wasn't a few years ago. So it was really nice to have that sort of all laid out for me. Obviously, I still had to like email the person and, express my interest in the internship that she had opened, but I didn't have to cold call people. So I was sort of paying for that. So I do think in that sense it was valuable, but it was sort of valuable and stressful at the same time.
I think one thing you find out, at least in book publishing, is that a lot of people have degrees, but aren't necessarily doing what they're doing because of the degrees. I think there's a kind of overlap between the people who wind up getting a master's or a PhD and people who wind up in book publishing. I mean, I have a very close relationship between my academic background and what I do in publishing, but in some of my jobs in the past, I didn't. So at Harvard University Press, I published scientific and books in science and technology. I don't have a science and technology background, but I found, it was perfectly fine to publish books in those areas because I was an editor who knew how to do that. That was what people were paying me for, not to be a subject expert. I think it can help. I will say it can hurt as well on the job market to have advanced degrees. Some people make assumptions about what kind of person you are. It can lead to debt. It can take time. I think there are reasons to think about it carefully. But if you do wind up having a degree of some kind and then going into publishing, one thing to bear in mind is how to translate your experience in getting that degree and the sort of skills you have and how that translate into whatever job you're looking for. Because it's not always apparent just looking at your resume, how having a degree in philosophy might help you in some other context or in biochemistry or whatever it might be, when in fact, a lot of the skills you learn in any degree program are highly transferable. Oftentimes it has to do with research, with communication, with organizing your ideas. And if you can spell that kind of stuff out, that can really turn something that might be a question mark in a recruiter's mind or interviewer's mind into a real positive. But you need to do work in terms of figuring out how to translate your skill set to something transferable.
Yeah, there are plenty of transferable skills from science to a career in communication. For me, it was more about the experience of getting the PhD and kind of figuring out what I wanted to do during that period of my life. So I don't think the degree is necessary. I do perhaps think about data and concepts a bit differently than other people, but that that can also be a negative in some cases. But just really, spending time intentionally thinking about why you're taking each step that you are and what sort of skills you want to get out of that experience is really important.
Thank you all. We have about 7 minutes left. And so out of respect for everyone's time, I'll ask one more question and then we'll end our panel for the day. So the final question I have is, what is one final piece of advice you would give to students who are hoping to start in or are continuing their journey in the publishing field?
I guess don't let what if kind of hold you back at all. If you're curious about something or interested in someone's career or, whatever it is, just do it. I kind of held back on my interests for, 8 years. And it took me, getting to grad school to realize what I really wanted to do. And I think if I had just been a bit bolder earlier on, I would have gotten there a lot faster.
I think that I think that someone had put in the chat earlier about like self-doubt and imposter syndrome and stuff like that, and I just want to say that like for me being an editor was like wow, like what if I was able to do that? It was a dream of mine to work in publishing, and I've been wanting to do something like this my whole life, and I sort of thought that it maybe wasn't smart enough, or I wasn't like as fancy enough as some of the people that I was in school with who were like extremely like academic and like very 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 good, which probably everyone on this panel was those people. And I just want to say that like there's a lot of different talent. Like publishing as an industry takes a lot of different types of people and a lot of different types of experiences, lived experiences, voices, and talents. And even if you don't see a model for yourself, we're waiting for you, and like, why not you? Why not? Because we need talent and we need people who are maybe coming from the industry from a different perspective. So I just encourage you to go for it and come on in.
And to that point, like passion is the most important thing because that's going to show through over talent, over skill, whatever it is. You can always learn that on the job, but if you're passionate about what you want to do, just let that shine through.
I would say don't be afraid of the things that you don't know. I was very afraid of the things that I didn't know when I was younger. And I think I've only gotten bolder, as the older I get, and I am not afraid of, I don't know, like you see a job posting and the classic thing is that that women feel like they have to check 100% of the boxes. And then men think they have to check 50% of the boxes. And I am now more in the 50% thing, right? I feel like I can figure out how to do the other 50% because I'm smart and I know how to Google, and I know how to ask questions, and I know how to use my network and be like, well, how did you do this? And like, whatever. So, as you're getting your start and you're looking at these job postings, and you're like, I don't have experience at, or whatever it is, think about other ways that you can kind of offset that, and be bolder than I was at your age.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to repeat something I think I mentioned earlier, because I think it's easy to just sort of not do if you're not careful, which is to do your research in advance, look to see where it is you're thinking of applying a job and find out really carefully what they do. And then try to contact somebody there for an informational interview, and do that. I think, as Christy said before, do that before you're looking for a job at a place. Look into the places you might want to work someday, learn about them, talk to somebody, because it is not only about learning so you're prepared to answer questions if you happen to get an interview. You might learn that it's not for you. It's not what you thought it was, or that's not the impression you get from the person you talk to. Or you might develop your network that way too. I just think I used to do a lot of hiring, and I was amazed at how many people wrote what I would consider very generic cover letters and had very generic applications versus those who clearly did their homework. And they weren't necessarily any better qualified, but the people who did their homework and who made me feel like they were applying for this job in particular, for this particular company, because this is what they wanted, had a better shot, I think, at getting attention than those who just sort of seemed to be putting something out there in a kind of random way.